Snow fell heavy upon frozen branches, blood-stained white winter grounds. Shivering, broken, Gwendolen crawled through bitter darkness. Weakness was a crime punishable by exile. Her father, Alpha Gideon, demanded perfection. She possessed zero-shifting abilities, remaining fully human. Consequently, her pack banished her into freezing oblivion. Death seemed certain. Wolves showed no mercy to outcasts. Yet, destiny had other plans. Deep within howling winds, massive footsteps approached. Shadows parted. Piercing golden eyes stared down at her trembling form. King Leander, undisputed ruler of all wolfkin, stood before her. He offered not death, but ultimate salvation. The courtyard of the Silver Pine Pack was ancient, its high stone walls built to withstand the brutal winters of the northern reaches. Tonight, however, the cold biting at Gwendolen Ashford's skin was nothing compared to the ice in her father's eyes. Gwendolen knelt on the frozen cobblestones, her thin linen dress offering no protection against the howling November wind. Surrounding her were the 300 members of her pack. These were the people who had watched her grow, the elders who had taught her to read the stars, and the warriors she had patched up after border skirmishes. Tonight, their faces were carved from stone. No empathy, no warmth, only the primal, collective disgust of wolves looking at a weak link. "Gwendolen of the House Ashford," her father's voice boomed. Alpha Gideon Ashford was a massive man, his presence demanding absolute submission. His dark hair was peppered with grey, but his jaw was tight with unfiltered rage. "For 19 years this pack has sheltered you. We have fed you from our hunts, protected you from our enemies, and waited for the goddess to bless you with the wolf spirit." Gwendolen squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear freezing on her cheek. She knew what was coming. She had known since her 18th birthday, came and went without a whisper of a shift, without the agonizing, glorious breaking of bones that signaled a werewolf coming into their true nature. She was a defect, a human born to an ancient lineage of apex predators. "You have failed the moon ritual for the final time," Gideon continued, stepping down from the raised wooden dais. He held a jagged ceremonial blade forged of dark iron. "A wolf without a beast is no wolf at all. You are a liability, a stain upon the Ashford name." "Father, please," Gwendolen whispered, her voice cracking. It was the first time she had spoken, and the sound of her own desperation made her stomach turn. "I can still serve. I run the estate's ledgers. I know the healing herbs better than anyone. I can—" "Silence!" Gideon roared, the sound vibrating with the low, terrifying resonance of his alpha command. Gwendolen's body violently flinched, instinctively submitting to the order though she lacked a wolf. Gideon grabbed her left hand, yanking it upward. With a swift, merciless stroke, he drew the dark iron blade across her palm. Gwendolen cried out as the metal seared her flesh, a chemical reaction to the silver-laced iron used to sever pack bonds. The pain was blinding, shooting up her arm and straight into her chest. The pack bond, a warm, invisible thread that connected her mind to the collective heartbeat of the Silver Pines, snapped. It felt as though a vital organ had been ripped from her chest. Gwendolen collapsed, gasping for air, clutching her bleeding hand to her stomach. She was completely, utterly alone in her mind. The comforting hum of her family was gone, replaced by a deafening, terrifying silence. "By the laws of the northern reaches, you are hereby stripped of the name Ashford," Gideon proclaimed, turning his back on her trembling form. "You are disowned. You have until midnight to cross the territorial river. If any patrol finds you on our lands after the moon reaches its zenith, you will be hunted and killed as a rogue. Take nothing. Leave now." Not a single soul moved to help her up. Gwendolen looked frantically at the front row of the crowd, catching the eye of her older brother, Cedric. For a fraction of a second, she saw a flicker of sorrow in his eyes, but he quickly hardened his jaw and looked away, refusing to challenge their father's absolute authority. Trembling, Gwendolen forced herself to her feet. The blood from her palm dripped onto the white snow, leaving a trail of ruby droplets as she turned and began the long walk toward the iron gates. The silence of the pack was more deafening than a roar. They parted for her, drawing back their cloaks to ensure they did not brush against the outcast. The journey to the territorial border was a blur of physical agony and psychological shock. Gwendolen had no cloak, no boots, only thin indoor slippers that were soaked through within minutes. The wind cut through her linen dress like tiny daggers. As she walked deeper into the ancient pine forest, the harsh reality of her situation settled over her. She was a human woman in the middle of a medieval wilderness, surrounded by rival packs, feral rogues, and winter storms. Her father hadn't just exiled her. He had sentenced her to an agonizing death. He just didn't want the blood directly on his own hands. By the time she reached the rushing, half-frozen waters of the White Fang River, midnight was approaching. Gwendolen didn't hesitate. She stepped into the freezing water, gasping as the brutal cold shocked her system. She waded across, the current dragging at her weak limbs, almost pulling her under. When she finally dragged herself onto the opposite bank, she was in the unclaimed lands, a vast, dangerous expanse of territory, separating the lesser packs from the domain of the High King. Exhausted, freezing and bleeding, Gwendolen crawled beneath the hollowed roots of an ancient oak tree. She curled into a tight ball, shivering violently. As the darkness of the winter night consumed her, she closed her eyes, praying that the cold would take her quickly before the monsters of the forest found her. 3 days. Gwendolen had survived 3 days in the brutal wild, driven purely by the primal human instinct to keep breathing. She had eaten nothing but a handful of winter berries that left her stomach cramped and aching. Her feet were blackened with frostbite, her dress torn to rags, and the wound on her hand was a festering, angry red. She was stumbling blindly through a dense thicket of black thorns, unaware that she had crossed the invisible boundary into the Iron Ridge, the southern border of the Blood Moon Court. This was the personal territory of the Alpha King, a place strictly forbidden to all outsiders. Her vision blurred, the world tilting precariously. Gwendolen fell to her knees in the deep snow, the rough bark of a dead tree scraping her cheek. She couldn't go any further. The cold had stopped hurting hours ago, replaced by a dangerous, heavy numbness. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the crisp air. Gwendolen's lethargy vanished, replaced by a spike of raw adrenaline. She weakly forced her head up. Emerging from the tree line were 4 wolves. They were massive, their fur matted and scarred, their eyes wide with the manic desperation of starvation. Rogues, wolves who had lost their humanity, driven mad by isolation and hunger. The largest of the 4, a beast with a missing ear and a rotting snout, snapped its jaws and took a slow step toward her. Gwendolen pressed her back against the dead tree, having nowhere left to run. She squeezed her eyes shut. Let it be fast, she prayed to a goddess who had long abandoned her. Please let it be fast. The rogue lunged, but the fatal bite never came. Instead, the forest erupted into chaos. A sound like thunder shattered the silence, a roar so earth-shattering and dominant that the very trees seemed to tremble. Gwendolen opened her eyes just in time to see a massive blur of midnight black fur collide with the lead rogue in midair. The sound of snapping bone echoed sickeningly. The rogue was thrown into a boulder, instantly dead. The remaining 3 rogues halted, whimpering in sudden, absolute terror. Gwendolen stared in shock at the beast that had just saved her. It was a dire wolf of nightmarish proportions, standing nearly as tall as a horse at the shoulder. Its fur was the color of a starless night, and its eyes burned with a terrifying, luminescent gold. This was no ordinary wolf. This was a myth brought to life. From the shadows of the forest, 6 more wolves emerged, though none as large as the black beast. They moved with military precision, flanking the terrified rogues. In less than 10 seconds, the skirmish was over. The king's elite guard, the Obsidian Vanguard, dispatched the feral outcasts with ruthless, silent efficiency. The massive black wolf slowly turned its golden gaze toward Gwendolen. She stopped breathing. The aura radiating from the creature was suffocating, an oppressive wave of power that demanded subservience. It took a step toward her, the snow crunching heavily under its massive paws. Then, right before her eyes, the beast began to shift. The sickening sound of bones realigning filled the air, but the transition was impossibly fast and graceful. Within seconds, a man stood where the monster had been. He was breathtakingly lethal. Tall, broad-shouldered, and muscular, he radiated a dark, majestic authority. His dark hair fell past his sharp, aristocratic jawline, and those same piercing golden eyes locked onto her. He was dressed in thick, dark leather riding pants, unbothered by the freezing temperature of the winter air against his bare, scarred chest. King Leander Hastings, the sovereign of the Blood Moon Court, the alpha of alphas, rumored to be a ruthless conqueror who bathed in the blood of traitors and commanded an army of nightmares. Gwendolen tried to push herself further back, trying to merge with the tree. Please," she stammered, her voice barely a raspy whisper. "I didn't mean to trespass." Leander did not speak. He walked slowly toward her, his heavy black boots crushing the snow. His second in command, a tall man named Dominic, who had just shifted back into human form and thrown a cloak over his own shoulders, stepped forward. "My king," Dominic warned quietly. "She's a trespasser, and she reeks of the Silver Pine Pack, though there's no wolf in her. A human spy." Leander raised a single hand, silencing his general instantly. He knelt in the snow directly in front of Gwendolen. She flinched, expecting him to strike her, to snap her neck the way he had the rogues. Instead, Leander leaned in close, his face inches from her neck. He inhaled deeply. When he pulled back, the look in his golden eyes was unfathomable. It was a mixture of primal shock, fierce possessiveness, and a strange, overwhelming relief. He didn't smell a spy. He didn't smell a weak, defective human. Beneath the scent of blood, fear, and freezing rain, Leander smelled the faint, intoxicating aroma of rain-washed lilacs and ancient magic. He smelled the missing half of his soul. "Mate," Leander growled, the word tearing from his throat in a deep, vibrating rumble that made the surrounding vanguard warriors freeze in absolute shock. The king, mateless for 3 centuries, had found his equal in a half-dead human castaway. Gwendolen's eyes widened. "What?" The exhaustion finally overtook her. The world spun out of control, and she slumped forward, her consciousness fading. Leander caught her before she hit the ground. He moved with surprising gentleness for a man of his size, lifting her fragile, freezing body into his arms. He unclasped the heavy, fur-lined velvet cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it tightly around her, completely enveloping her small form against his burning hot chest. "We ride for Obsidian Keep," Leander ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Now." Dominic stared at the unconscious girl in the king's arms. "Sire, she is a Silver Pine exile. She has no wolf. The court will—" Leander's head snapped toward his general, his eyes flashing a dangerous glowing gold. "The court will bow, or I will mount their heads on spikes outside the throne room. Bring my horse." Warmth. It was the first thing Gwendolen registered, an enveloping, luxurious warmth that seeped into her aching bones. She slowly opened her eyes, squinting against the soft glow of crackling firelight. She wasn't in the forest. She was lying in the center of a massive, four-poster bed, draped in crimson velvet and thick furs. The ceiling above her was vaulted stone, carved with intricate murals of wolves and ancient moons. The architecture was imposing, brutalist yet breathtakingly wealthy. Gwendolen shot up, a wave of dizziness forcing her back against the plush pillows. She looked down at herself. The rags she had worn in the forest were gone, replaced by a soft, silken nightgown of pale silver. Her frostbitten feet were heavily bandaged, and the sliced palm of her hand had been stitched and covered in a foul-smelling but soothing herbal poultice. "You should not move so quickly, little bird," a gentle voice spoke from the corner of the room. Gwendolen turned her head sharply to see an older woman with silver hair and kind, crinkling eyes sitting by the hearth, grinding herbs in a stone mortar. "Who are you? Where am I?" Gwendolen asked, her voice raspy. "I am Matilda, chief healer of the Obsidian Keep," the woman replied, setting down her pestle and pouring a cup of steaming broth from an iron kettle over the fire. "And you, child, are in the private chambers of the Alpha King. You are in the heart of the Blood Moon Court." Gwendolen's breath hitched. The king's private chambers. Panic clawed at her throat. Why am I here? I'm an outcast. I'm nobody. If the king intends to hold me for ransom, Gideon Ashford won't pay a single copper for me. He threw me out. Matilda smiled softly, walking over to hand Gwendolen the warm cup. "Drink this. And trust me, child. King Leander has no need for coppers, nor does he care for the politics of the Silver Pines. He brought you here, because you belong here." Before Gwendolen could question the cryptic statement, the heavy oak doors of the chamber swung open. Two heavily armored guards stepped aside, bowing their heads in deep reverence as King Leander entered. In the light of the fire, without the chaos of the forest, he was even more intimidating. He wore a tailored tunic of black silk and a heavy leather coat embroidered with silver threads. He moved with the quiet, deadly grace of a predator who owned everything he surveyed. Matilda immediately dropped into a low curtsy. "My king, her fever has broken. The frostbite will heal without lasting damage, provided she rests." "Leave us," Leander commanded softly. His eyes never left Gwendolen. Matilda bowed and quickly exited, the heavy doors closing with a solid thud that sounded entirely too final. Gwendolen clutched the fur blankets to her chest, pushing herself as far back into the headboard as she could. Leander approached the bed slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. He stopped a few feet away, seemingly hyper-aware of her fear. "Do not shrink away from me," he said, his voice a rich, dark velvet that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "No one in this keep will ever harm you. You have my word." "Why did you save me?" Gwendolen asked, her voice shaking despite her attempt to sound brave. "Wolves don't save humans. They certainly don't put them in the royal bed." Leander's gaze darkened, his golden eyes sweeping over her pale face. "You are not merely human, Gwendolen, though your old pack was too blinded by their own arrogance to see it." Gwendolen froze. "You know my name." "I know everything about you," Leander replied, taking a step closer. "My spies confirmed it yesterday. Gwendolen, formerly of House Ashford, disowned for failing to shift, sentenced to death by the cold." A terrifying sneer curled his lip at the mention of her father. "Gideon Ashford will pay for his cruelty. I will see his lands burned and his title stripped before the year is out." "You would start a war over a banished runt?" Gwendolen asked in disbelief. Leander finally reached out, his large, calloused hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was impossibly light, sending a jolt of pure, electric heat straight through her skin. Gwendolen gasped, staring up into his eyes. "I would burn this entire continent to ash for you," Leander whispered fiercely. "You are my mate, Gwendolen. The goddess crafted your soul specifically for mine. You belong to me, and I to you." The declaration hung in the air, heavy and world-altering. Mate. Gwendolen's mind reeled. How could a human be mated to the strongest werewolf in history? It defied all laws of nature. Before she could process the revelation, Leander stepped back, his expression turning stoic. "Tonight there is a banquet. The high lords and ladies of my court are eager to see the woman I brought back from the Iron Ridge. You will attend at my side." "They will hate me," Gwendolen whispered, shrinking back. "A human holding the title of queen? They will tear me apart." "Let them try," Leander smiled, a dark, bloodthirsty curve of his lips. "It has been decades since I made an example of a traitor. I welcome the opportunity." 3 hours later, Gwendolen found herself walking down the massive, torchlit corridors of Obsidian Keep. Maidservants had bathed her, rubbing scented oils into her skin and dressing her in a gown of breathtaking midnight blue velvet, embroidered with silver moon phases. It was heavier and more expensive than anything she had ever worn. Leander walked beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. As they approached the grand dining hall, the thunderous noise of hundreds of wolves, feasting and arguing, spilled out. The guards announced their presence, and an immediate, suffocating silence fell over the massive room. Gwendolen kept her chin up, channeling every ounce of courage she had learned from surviving her father's house. She walked into the hall with the Alpha King, hundreds of eyes, glowing with various shades of predatory intent, locked onto her. She could hear them sniffing the air, their heightened senses immediately picking up the lack of a wolf spirit within her. Whispers broke out like wildfire. Human. No wolf. A pet. Leander guided her to the raised dais at the head of the hall, seating her in the ornate chair directly to the right of his throne. It was the seat of the Queen. The gasps in the room were audible. To Gwendolen's left, sitting just below the dais, was a woman whose beauty was as sharp as a blade. She had fiery red hair and eyes the color of emeralds. Lady Rowena Sinclair, daughter of the richest duke in the Blood Moon Court. Rumor had it that she was the favored candidate to become Leander's chosen queen, a political match to secure the southern borders. Rowena stared at Gwendolen with undisguised, venomous hatred. She raised her golden goblet, a sickly sweet smile on her face. "My king," Rowena called out, her voice cutting through the hall. "You grace us with a new pet. Tell us, where did you find such a fragile little thing? Will she be performing tricks for the court?" The hall fell dead silent. The tension was thick enough to slice with a sword. Leander did not yell. He did not growl. He simply turned his gaze slowly toward Rowena, his golden eyes flaring with lethal intent. He picked up a silver steak knife from the table and, with a flick of his wrist, hurled it across the room. The blade embedded itself deep into the heavy oak table, directly between Rowena's index and middle fingers, missing her flesh by a millimeter. Rowena shrieked, falling backward out of her chair. Leander stood up, his voice carrying the terrifying weight of his alpha command. "The woman beside me is Gwendolen. She is my true and fated mate. She is the future queen of the Blood Moon Court. The next person who disrespects her will lose their tongue. The person after that will lose their head." Do we understand each other?" The entire hall, hundreds of the most dangerous predators in the world, simultaneously dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in complete submission. Gwendolen sat frozen, looking at the man beside her. Gideon Ashford had cast her out for being weak, but King Leander Hastings looked at her as if she were the very source of his strength. The game of survival hadn't ended in the winter forest. It had only just begun. And this time, the stakes were a kingdom. Winter tightened its icy grip around Obsidian Keep, completely burying the lower courtyards in snow, yet the atmosphere inside the fortress boiled with unseen tension. 3 weeks had passed since King Leander claimed Gwendolen as his mate before the entire court. To the outside world, she was the untouchable future queen. Within the shadowy corridors of the keep, however, she was a target with a target painted squarely on her back. Gwendolen spent most of her days in the royal archives, a massive, cavernous library filled with centuries of werewolf lore, treaties, and taxation records. Left alone while Leander managed the brutal border skirmishes in the east, she sought refuge in the one thing she understood better than anyone: logic. Her newly appointed handmaiden, Beatrice Kensington, a quiet, fiercely loyal woman whose husband had died defending Leander in a past rebellion, set a silver tray of chamomile tea on the heavy oak desk. "You push yourself too hard, my lady," Beatrice warned softly, her eyes scanning the towering stacks of parchment Gwendolen had requested from the royal treasurer. "The nobles are already whispering. They say you hide in the dusty tomes because you are too frail to walk the training grounds." Gwendolen did not look up from the ledger, her finger tracing a line of faded ink. "Let them whisper, Beatrice. A wolf uses its fangs to secure dominance. I possess no fangs, so I must use my mind. Look at this." Beatrice leaned over, squinting at the complex columns of numbers. "It is the winter grain allocation for the southern provinces, my lady." "What of it?" "It is a lie," Gwendolen stated flatly, tapping the parchment. "Lord Harrison Caldwell oversees the southern granaries. For the past 3 winters, he has reported a 20% loss due to rot and frost. Yet the taxation reports from the merchant guilds in the neutral territories show a massive influx of blood moon grain being sold on the black market. Caldwell is starving his own people to line his pockets, and he is doctoring the ledgers to hide his treason from the king." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lord Caldwell is the uncle of Lady Rowena. He is one of the most powerful dukes in the court. To accuse him without a wolf's strength to back your claim—" "I do not need a wolf to prove mathematics," Gwendolen said, rolling up the scroll with determination. "Prepare my cloak. We are going to the war room." Deep within the keep, Leander stood over a massive stone map of the northern reaches, surrounded by his top military commanders, including Dominic and Lord Arthur Pendleton. The king looked exhausted, dark circles shadowing his glowing golden eyes. The rogue attacks along the borders were increasing, and unrest was brewing. When the heavy iron doors swung open, the generals immediately bristled, their inner wolves agitated by an uninvited presence. But when Gwendolen stepped into the torchlight, Leander's posture instantly shifted. The lethal tension bleeding from his broad shoulders vanished, replaced by a fierce, magnetic pull toward his mate. "Gwendolen!" Leander rumbled, dismissing his generals with a sharp wave of his hand. They stepped back, though Lord Arthur eyed the human girl with undisguised skepticism. "You should be resting. The keep is drafty." "I have been reading," Gwendolen announced, stepping up to the stone table. She did not flinch beneath the heavy gazes of the massive warriors surrounding her. She unrolled the ledger and slammed it down over the map of the southern territories. "Your Grace, you are preparing to send 3 legions to quell the riots in the south. You believe it is a rogue uprising." "It is," General Dominic grunted. "The southern peasants are attacking our supply caravans." "They are attacking because they are starving, General," Gwendolen corrected sharply, her voice steady and commanding. She pointed to the numbers. "Lord Harrison Caldwell has been embezzling the royal grain reserves. He claims winter rot, but the mathematics prove he is selling the kingdom's food to the neutral territories. Your people are not rebelling against the crown. They are starving to death, and they are desperate." Dead silence fell over the war room. Lord Arthur scoffed loudly. "Preposterous. Lord Caldwell is a decorated veteran. You would trust the scribbles of a human outcast over a Duke of the Blood Moon Court?" Leander raised a single scarred hand. The room froze. The Alpha King stepped beside Gwendolen, his massive frame towering over her as he leaned down to inspect the ledgers. His eyes scanned the numbers, his sharp mind quickly connecting the discrepancies Gwendolen had highlighted. Slowly, a terrifying, dark rumble began in his chest. It was the sound of a predator discovering a rat in its den. "She is right," Leander whispered, his voice dripping with lethal intent. He looked at Dominic. "Arrest Harrison Caldwell. Lock down the southern gates. If he resists, break his legs." "My king?" Dominic bowed deeply, shooting a look of profound, newfound respect toward Gwendolen, before marching out of the room. Leander turned to Gwendolen, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of awe and overwhelming pride. He reached out, his rough thumb tracing the curve of her jawline. "They called you weak," he murmured, loud enough for the remaining generals to hear. "Yet, in 3 weeks, you have uncovered a treason that my council missed for 3 years. You are the sharpest blade in this keep, my brilliant mate." News of Gwendolen's discovery spread through the fortress like wildfire. By nightfall, Harrison Caldwell was rotting in the dungeons, stripped of his titles. For the lower-ranking wolves and the servants, Gwendolen became an instant hero. But for the corrupt elites, she transformed from a pathetic joke into a lethal threat. In the darkest wing of the keep, Lady Rowena Sinclair paced furiously before a crackling hearth. Her uncle was imprisoned, her family's wealth seized, and her path to the throne effectively blocked by a human girl who wielded a quill like a broadsword. "She has to die," Rowena hissed to a shadowy figure standing by the window, a mercenary loyal to the Caldwell estate. "She is poisoning the king's mind. A human cannot be allowed to dictate the fate of apex predators." "The king watches her constantly, my lady," the mercenary replied, his voice raspy. "His vanguard guards her door. A blade will never reach her." Rowena stopped pacing, a wicked, venomous smile spreading across her beautiful face. She reached into a hidden compartment of her vanity, pulling out a tiny crystal vial filled with a shimmering, iridescent purple liquid. "Then we will not use a blade," Rowena whispered. "We will use the old magic. Refined wolf's bane, laced with nightshade, odorless, tasteless. Even the king's heightened senses will not detect it in a cup of spiced wine. At the winter solstice feast tomorrow, the little human will drink to her new home. And by midnight, her fragile heart will simply stop." The winter solstice ball was a spectacle of breathtaking, savage grandeur. The grand hall was transformed into a glittering ice palace, adorned with 1,000-year-old crystal chandeliers, banners of midnight blue, and massive hearths roaring with enchanted blue flames. The elite of the werewolf world gathered, their finery masking the primal beasts lurking just beneath their skin. Gwendolen stood on the balcony overlooking the hall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was dressed in a gown of spun silver and dark velvet, a delicate diamond diadem resting in her dark hair. She looked every inch a queen, yet her palms were slick with nervous sweat. "You are shaking," Leander noted quietly, stepping out of the shadows. He wore his formal ceremonial armor, dark steel etched with ancient runes, a heavy fur mantle draped across his broad shoulders. He looked like a god of war, terrifying and magnificent. "I am a human, walking into a den of wolves whose food I just confiscated," Gwendolen replied with a dry, self-deprecating smile. "Forgive me if I lack your supreme confidence." Leander chuckled, a deep, rich sound that warmed her frozen nerves. He stepped close, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and pulling her back against his solid chest. "They will bow to you, Gwendolen. Not because I command it, but because they have seen your worth. And if anyone looks at you with anything less than absolute reverence, I will pluck their eyes from their skulls." "Very romantic, Your Grace," she teased softly, leaning into his warmth. The royal herald blew a heavy iron horn, signaling the arrival of the king and his mate. Together, Leander and Gwendolen descended the grand marble staircase. The music swelled, and the court fell into a deep, synchronized bow. For the first time, Gwendolen noticed that the glares of contempt had been replaced by looks of wary respect, and in some cases, genuine gratitude. The feast was a lavish affair, filled with roasted meats, exotic winter fruits, and endless rivers of wine. Gwendolen sat at Leander's right hand, gracefully navigating the complex political conversations that the High Lords threw her way. She was holding her own, dismantling their subtle verbal traps with sharp wit and undeniable grace. As the midnight hour approached, the traditional solstice toast was called. Servants moved through the hall, filling every silver and gold goblet with a special vintage of spiced blood wine. Lady Rowena, wearing a gown of emerald silk, stepped forward from the crowd. She held her goblet high, her face a mask of perfectly crafted, deceptive contrition. "My king," Rowena called out, her voice ringing clearly over the silent hall. "I wish to offer a toast to the future of the Blood Moon Court, and to Lady Gwendolen. Though her origins are humble, she has proven that a sharp mind is a formidable weapon. May the goddess bless her health and her reign." Gwendolen felt a chill run down her spine. The words were polite, but Rowena's green eyes burned with a manic, triumphant light. Still, protocol demanded she accept the toast. Gwendolen raised her golden goblet, meeting Rowena's gaze, and took a deep drink of the spiced wine. It tasted like cinnamon and dark cherries. But the moment the liquid hit her stomach, something went catastrophically wrong. A wave of absolute, blinding agony tore through Gwendolen's veins. It was not the dull ache of poison. It was a violent, scorching fire that felt as though liquid glass was being pumped into her heart. The golden goblet slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the stone floor. Gwendolen gasped, her hands flying to her throat as she collapsed forward. "Gwendolen!" Leander's roar shattered the festive air. He caught her before she hit the floor, his face pale with sudden, blinding terror. "Healer, bring Matilda, now!" The hall erupted into pure chaos. Gwendolen writhed in Leander's arms, her skin burning with an unnatural fever. She could hear Leander screaming her name, his voice thick with a devastation that tore at her soul. She could hear the frantic gasps of the crowd. "It burns," she thought, her vision going black. "This is how I die." But death did not come. Instead, deep within the darkest, most suppressed corner of her soul, something snapped. For 19 years, Gideon Ashford had fed her small, daily doses of a rare, magical suppressant disguised as vitamins, convincing her she was a defective human. He had locked away her true nature because he feared the ancient prophecy attached to his bloodline. The lethal dose of refined wolfsbane coursing through her veins acted as a catalyst, violently burning away the chemical chains her father had placed on her soul. Suddenly, the scent of rain-washed lilacs exploded into the massive hall, so thick and overpowering that several wolves dropped to their knees, gasping for air. Leander froze, staring down at the woman in his arms. Gwendolen stopped thrashing. The agonizing pain vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, intoxicating, limitless power. She slowly opened her eyes. They were no longer the soft brown of a human. They were glowing, a brilliant, ethereal, blinding silver, like twin full moons trapped in a mortal skull. The wounds in her body from the poison healed in a fraction of a second. A brilliant, visible aura of silver light radiated from her skin, washing over the stone floors of the keep. Where the light touched, frost instantly melted, and the dead winter vines wrapped around the pillars suddenly burst into vibrant, impossible white blooms. "By the goddess," Lord Arthur whispered, falling to his knees in sheer terror and awe. She is not a wolf." "No," Leander breathed, his golden eyes wide with a reverence that bordered on worship. He gently helped her to her feet, realizing that his mate possessed an aura of dominance that rivaled his own. Gwendolen stood tall, the silver light slowly fading back into her skin, leaving her looking ethereal and utterly divine. The knowledge of what she was flooded her mind, unlocked from centuries of genetic memory. She was a mooncaster, a warden of the goddess, the rarest and most powerful supernatural beings in existence, capable of commanding the elements and bending the will of any werewolf on Earth. Gwendolen turned her glowing silver gaze toward the crowd, locking onto the terrified, trembling form of Lady Rowena. "You laced my wine with wolfsbane," Gwendolen spoke, her voice layered with a strange, echoing harmonic resonance that made the stones of the keep vibrate. Rowena fell to her knees, sobbing hysterically. "No, I didn't. She is a witch. The human is a witch." Leander moved faster than lightning. In a blur of midnight fur and black leather, he had Rowena by the throat, hoisting her completely off the ground. His fangs descended, his eyes bleeding into a murderous crimson. "You dared to touch my queen," he snarled, the sound promising a slow, agonizing death. "Leander, stop." Gwendolen's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute, undeniable authority. Leander's beast halted instantly, completely subdued by the command of the mooncaster. He dropped Rowena, who collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air in a puddle of her own making. "Do not stain your hands with her blood on a holy night," Gwendolen said, stepping down from the dais. She looked down at the pathetic noblewoman. "Throw her in the deepest cell of the Iron Tower. Let her rot in the dark, knowing that the weak human she tried to murder will rule her lands." The guards dragged a screaming Rowena away. The rest of the court remained frozen, staring at their new queen with absolute, unadulterated awe. Gideon Ashford had cast out a pebble, completely unaware he was throwing away a diamond that could shatter mountains. Gwendolen took Leander's massive hand in hers, the silver glow in her eyes finally settling. She was no longer a victim of the winter. She was the storm itself. News of the winter solstice miracle did not simply travel, it exploded across the northern reaches like a shockwave. Whispers of the glowing Silver Queen reached the high, fortified walls of the Silver Pine Pack within a fortnight. In his grand study, Alpha Gideon Ashford smashed a heavy crystal decanter against the stone fireplace. The expensive amber liquid hissed as it hit the flames. Standing at attention before him was Commander Roderick Belmont, a ruthless mercenary from the neighboring Duchy of Somerset, whom Gideon had hired to bolster his borders. "A mooncaster!" Gideon snarled, his chest heaving with a mixture of absolute terror and unbridled rage. I fed her the liquid iron and wolfsbane extract every morning for 19 years. I suppressed the ancient bloodline. She was supposed to die in the snow. She did not die, Alpha, Commander Belmont replied coolly, his hand resting on the pommel of his broad sword. Instead, she fell into the lap of King Leander Hastings. The Blood Moon Court is rallying. The Southern Lords, once loyal to the disgraced Harrison Caldwell, have sworn fealty to her. Your daughter is no longer a defenseless runaway. She is a deity among wolves. Gideon paced the room, his mind racing. He knew the ancient laws. A mooncaster held divine authority over all werewolf kind. It was a power that bypassed bloodlines and pack bonds. If Gwendolyn chose to march on the Silver Pines, his own warriors would likely bow to her without unsheathing a single blade. "We strike first," Gideon declared, his eyes burning with the manic desperation of a cornered predator. "We send ravens to the splintered factions, the Montgomery family in the east, the disgraced Sinclair loyalists in the south. We tell them that Leander has been bewitched by a dark sorceress. We frame her awakening as black magic. If we sever the serpent's head before she learns to fully wield her power, the Blood Moon Court will collapse into civil war, and the North will reign supreme." Miles away, within the impenetrable walls of Obsidian Keep, Gwendolyn was no longer hiding in the royal archives. The silver light that had erupted from her on the solstice had permanently changed her. She moved with a liquid, predatory grace, her senses sharper than any Alpha's. The crushing anxiety that had plagued her human existence was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient serenity. She stood in the center of the war room, her hands resting flat against the massive stone map. Leander stood at her shoulder, his massive frame a comforting wall of heat. General Dominic and the newly appointed council members watched her with absolute, unwavering loyalty. "Gideon is marching," Leander announced, his golden eyes scanning the intercepted missives scattered across the table. "He has gathered a coalition, 6,000 wolves, backed by Belmont's heavy infantry. They crossed the Whitefang River at dawn. They are coming for the keep." "He calls me a witch," Gwendolyn noted, reading a piece of parchment stamped with her father's wax seal. A cold, humorless smile touched her lips. "He claims I used dark magic to enthrall you, Leander. He is relying on fear and superstition to keep his coalition together." "Let them come," Dominic growled, slamming a fist against his breastplate. "The vanguard will paint the snow with their blood. We outnumber them, and our warriors fight for the true queen." Gwendolyn raised a hand, and the room instantly fell silent. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the torchlight. "No, there will be no slaughter. The wolves marching under my father's banner are acting on lies and misplaced loyalty. They are my people, the people who raised me, even if they turned their backs when commanded to. I will not start my reign by wiping out half of the northern reaches." Leander turned to her, his brow furrowed in protective concern. "Gwendolyn, this is war. Gideon will not hesitate to kill you." "Gideon will try," Gwendolyn corrected, turning to face her mate. She reached up, tracing the rough scar on Leander's cheek. "But he relies on brute force. He does not understand what I am." "Draw up the vanguard, Leander. Meet them on the fields of ash just beyond the iron gates. But when the battle lines are drawn, you will hold your men back. I will face my father." Leander's beast rumbled in his chest, violently rejecting the idea of putting his mate in danger. But as he looked into her glowing silver eyes, he saw the undeniable authority of the goddess herself. He bowed his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. "As you command, my queen." The fields of ash were a vast, frozen tundra lying in the shadow of Obsidian Keep. As the morning sun broke through the heavy grey clouds, it illuminated a terrifying spectacle. To the north stood the army of the Silver Pines. 6,000 warriors, clad in heavy furs and iron armour, their breaths pluming in the freezing air. At their forefront sat Alpha Gideon Ashford atop a massive grey warhorse, flanked by Commander Belmont and the treasonous lords of the Montgomery estate. To the south stood the Obsidian vanguard. They were fewer in number, but they were the elite, massive, disciplined, and terrifyingly silent. At their centre, King Leander sat upon his midnight black stallion, wearing the heavy, spiked crown of the Blood Moon Court. But it was the figure beside the king that commanded the attention of every soul on the battlefield. Gwendolen rode a pristine white mare. She wore no armour, only a flowing gown of stark white velvet and a heavy silver cloak. She looked fragile against the brutal backdrop of winter warfare, yet an aura of palpable, vibrating energy radiated from her, making the very air around her shimmer. Gideon spurred his horse forward, stopping perfectly in the centre of the frozen no-man's land. "Leander Hastings!" he roared, his voice magically amplified to reach the cliffs. "Hand over the witch. She has corrupted the natural order. Surrender her to the justice of the northern reaches, and your keep will be spared." Leander did not answer. He merely looked at Gwendolen and gave a single curt nod. Gwendolen nudged her mare forward, riding out alone to meet the man who had ordered her death. As she approached, the Silver Pine warriors in the front ranks began to shift uncomfortably. Their inner beasts were whining, instinctively recognizing the divine presence of the Mooncaster. "Hello, Father," Gwendolen said, her voice eerily calm, yet it carried across the battlefield without the need to shout. It resonated in the minds of every wolf present. Gideon's face twisted in disgust. "You are no daughter of mine. You are a parasite, a defect." "I am the defect you drugged for 19 years, Gwendolen corrected smoothly. "You poisoned my food. You suppressed the goddess's gift because you were terrified. You knew the ancient texts. You knew a Mooncaster would command absolute obedience from every alpha on this continent, and your pathetic, fragile ego could not stomach bowing to your own flesh and blood." Murmurs erupted through the front lines of the Silver Pine army. Belmont nervously gripped his reins, sensing the shifting tide. "Lies!" Gideon bellowed, drawing his dark iron broadsword. "You speak with the tongue of a serpent. I challenge you, Leander Hastings, an alpha duel for the fate of this kingdom, or are you too cowardly to fight your own battles?" Before Leander could ride forward to accept, Gwendolen slid gracefully from her horse. She stepped onto the frozen ground, walking directly toward her father's towering warhorse. "Leander is the king," Gwendolen said, her voice dropping an octave, echoing with a terrifying ethereal resonance. "But I am the goddess's wrath, and I accept your challenge, Gideon." Gideon let out a barking laugh of disbelief. "You? A little girl in a velvet dress?" He swung his heavy leg over his saddle, dropping to the ground with a heavy thud. "I will mount your head on my gates." Gideon lunged. He moved with the blinding speed of an alpha, his dark iron blade arcing directly toward Gwendolen's neck. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise a weapon. Gwendolen simply opened her eyes wide, unleashing the full, unbridled power of her bloodline. A blinding pillar of silver light erupted from her body, striking the heavens and bathing the entire battlefield in a shockwave of raw, lunar magic. The kinetic force of the blast hit Gideon like a battering ram, throwing his massive body backward through the air. He crashed into the frozen earth, his sword shattering into a dozen pieces. Every single werewolf on the battlefield, all 10,000 of them, was instantly forced to their knees. The gravitational pull of Gwendolen's command was absolute. Even Leander dismounted, dropping to one knee in pure, reverent submission to his mate. Gwendolen walked slowly toward her father, who was gasping for air, paralyzed by the oppressive weight of her aura. The silver light burned around her like a halo of cold fire. "You cast me out into the winter because you believed I lacked a wolf." Gwendolen looked down at him, her voice echoing in the minds of the thousands of kneeling soldiers. "You tore my pack bond from my chest. You sentenced me to freeze in the dark because you deemed me weak. Monster!" Gideon choked out, blood trickling from his nose. "No, I am justice," Gwendolen stated coldly. She reached down, placing her bare, glowing hand directly over Gideon's heart. "By the power vested in me by the moon, and by the ancient laws of the northern reaches, I judge you unworthy of the beast you carry." Gideon's eyes widened in sheer, unparalleled horror as he realized her intent. "No, please! Gwendolen, no!" With a sharp, twisting motion of her wrist, Gwendolen pulled. A guttural, agonizing scream ripped from Gideon's throat as the magical tether, binding his human soul to his wolf spirit, was violently, permanently severed. The silver light flared brilliantly and then vanished. Gideon collapsed in the snow, sobbing uncontrollably. He was completely empty. The primal strength, the heightened senses, the comforting hum of the beast within. It was all gone. Gwendolen had reduced the most feared alpha of the North to an ordinary, powerless human. Poetic, devastating justice. Gwendolen turned her back on her weeping father and faced the kneeling army of the Silver Pines. "Gideon Ashford is broken," Gwendolen proclaimed, her voice ringing clear over the silent, awestruck crowd. "Your debts to him are forgiven. Your oaths are dissolved. Stand with the Blood Moon Court, and you shall have food, warmth, and honor. Turn against me, and you will share his fate." Slowly, Commander Belmont dropped his sword into the snow. The lords of Montgomery followed suit. Within moments, the entire northern army bowed their heads to the frozen earth, pledging their eternal loyalty to the Mooncaster Queen. Leander walked forward, ignoring the groveling form of Gideon. He wrapped his arms around Gwendolen, pulling her against his chest, completely unfazed by the lingering magical heat radiating from her skin. He looked out over the massive, unified army, a dark, triumphant smile playing on his lips. The winter banishing had intended to end a fragile life. Instead, it had forged an empire. From a shivering outcast bleeding in the unforgiving winter snow to the undisputed queen of the greatest werewolf empire in history, Gwendolen's journey rewrote the very fabric of her world. She did not survive by mimicking the brutal violence of the alphas who despised her. She triumphed by mastering her own mind, exposing political corruption, and ultimately embracing the divine, ethereal magic that her abusers desperately tried to bury. Gideon Ashford's fatal flaw was mistaking cruelty for strength, a mistake that cost him his kingdom and his spirit. King Leander Hastings, however, recognized a diamond where others saw glass. Together, they united the fractured northern and southern realms under the banner of the Blood Moon Court. Gwendolen ruled not with an iron fist, but with blinding silver light, proving forever that true power does not lie in the sharpness of one's fangs, but in the unbreakable resilience of the soul.